If the body isn't healing, it is not broken. It simply doesn't have enough resources or energy. Right? I really think health can be broken down into a very simple equation. And in this video, I want to show you where health comes from in the terms of energy and resources, and what has happened to our supply of those resources. And this being a huge missing piece in a lot of the chronic health issues that we see in the 21st century. So let's break this down, right? If we really consider health, right, to be about resources, right? We've got the human body, my beautiful stick figure, right? The first thing we want to kind of understand is to run this thing requires energy, okay? Start with what we want to understand what's called our basal metabolic rate, which is essentially like how much energy does it cost just to keep the lights on, right? For you to digest food and pump your heart and keep your brain on and be able to engage in the world, it requires energy, right? Typically in the form of something called ATP, right? So the energy that the body runs on is ATP, right? This is what happens at our cells to produce energy. Now, many people probably comprehend that. We remember high school biology, right? Mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell. Mitochondria produces ATP, right? And this provides cellular energy for our body to function. But the vast majority of people, let's give this little guy a mouth, right? Think of energy in the form of calories, right? The food that we eat. And yes, this is obviously a super important factor, right? The food that we eat provides us with the raw materials for us to kind of break things down and produce energy in the form that the body can use, right? But beyond food, the first kind of point I want to highlight here is food is not our only source of energy, right? We also, if I give this guy some eyes, right, we get energy in the source of light, right? We are literally solar panels. We are solar charged power banks. When we understand the role that vitamin D plays, right? The receptors that we have all across our skin and almost every cell in the body, receptors for vitamin D, right? That sunlight is a hugely important source of energy. Now, it doesn't come in the form of calories. It's more coming in the form of information, right? The wavelengths of light, which can trigger certain responses in our body, right? Sunlight being a really, really important source of information and therefore energy for my body to function. Right? The next thing that I think is super important, let's come down to this guy's feet, right, is electromagnetic energy, right? And let's just call this the ground. But firstly, understanding that the body, right, runs with electricity and magnetism, electromagnetism. And I want to kind of break this down because immediately people think, oh, this is some woo-woo stuff like the electromagnetic field of the body, right? If you go to the doctor and they measure your heart and they do an electrocardiogram, guess what they're measuring? The electrical potential of your heart, right? They're measuring electrical impulses. If you go to the neurologist and you get an electroencephalogram, an EEG, right, it is measuring electrical energy, right? Now, we know that anything that generates an electric field also generates a magnetic field, right? So understanding the body is running, right, with this electromagnetic field. The earth also generates an electromagnetic field, right? When we're in contact with the earth, right, it creates a movement of electrons, right? And that is electrical current or electricity, right? It is a movement of electrons. So ground, an important element, right, of allowing the body to kind of recalibrate, to create balance, to find its way back to balance, right? And that is done through movement of energy, right? Again, coming back to this energy. And the final one, which we'll just have to kind of draw from here because I'm not going to draw any lungs, is breath, right? Chi, prana, right? This life force energy. The way we breathe fundamentally influences our ability to produce energy. Now, so if we kind of think of this concept, right, that energy is not just in the form of the calories from the food we eat, but it's also coming from sunlight, my relationship with the sun. It's also coming from the ground, right, or the electrical potential of the earth, and it is coming from the way that I breathe. The next thing I want to point out, and this is where it gets super interesting, is the breakdown that has happened over time in our ability to actually assimilate energy from these sources. Let's start with food, right? You may or may not have heard this, but you know, a tomato today is not the same as a tomato 50 years ago. What I mean by that is the nutrient density right? The profile of what is in that tomato because of the soil that it was grown in and the conditions that it was grown in, right? We've seen this massive wave of industrial agriculture with petrochemical based fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides. The soil has been degraded immensely through tilling, right? So like the environment in which tomatoes are growing today, or all food growing today, is very different to what it was 50 years ago, 500 years ago, 5,000 years ago. And so the source of energy that's coming in is degraded, right? There's less energy coming in, right? And this is just on the food that we're growing. This could be organic, regenerative, right? We're still dealing with depleted soils, right? And a food system that is built around convenience, right? You can get an apple in New York that was grown in Australia. I look at the grocery market, you'll see the stickers and it's like, oh, this kiwi fruit was flown in from Chile. It's crazy, right? So when it was picked, the conditions around the food have changed. But let's add in things like hyper-processed foods, added sugars, added colors, additives, right? Like preservatives. These things that I don't think we fully comprehend as to what they do, again, as sources of information for the body. But the point I'm trying to make is just this primary source of fuel that we all run on over time has become depleted, right? Yet the demands on our body have actually gone up. Right? This is something I'm going to come back to later in this video, that we've seen a massive decrease in supply, but a massive increase in demand. Right? But let's stick with supply. So the energy we're getting from our food is just not as sufficient, right? Not as abundant as it once was. The addition of food ingredients and the, I would argue, bastardization of our food system, right? That is created science-based, right? Like flavor profiles and things that wouldn't naturally exist in nature, right? This combination of certain high calorie, high sweetness, high salty, high fat, right? That is just artificially engineered. So we've got this crazy change in inputs to our food, right? Now let's kind of move to sunlight. Most people today are terrified of the sun, right? We've been on this 30-year vendetta that the sun is this dangerous thing, right? The story that has been perpetuated, right, and has developed this fearful association with the sun. So what do people do? They lather themselves in chemical-laden, toxic sunscreen. It's only just in the last few years that like oxybenzene and benzates were removed from sunscreen as known carcinogens. Right? Plenty of sunscreen still got that shit in it, right? Because it's been sitting on the shelf for a while. So we have developed this relationship with the thing in the sky is scary, and I'm going to protect myself from it, right? So I'm going to avoid it. We've also created artificial light. I can be on my phone, which is kind of mimicking the wavelength of sun at certain times of day. I could have the fluorescent lights on at midnight, right? Our rhythm, our circadian rhythm, right? Our connection with the rhythms of nature has been severely disrupted. When the sun rises in the morning, there's an immense amount of information for these melanopsin receptors in our eyes that send a signal to this part of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, right? All these big fancy words, but that's kind of like a master clock, right? And it impacts the rest of the body and says, oh, right, stop secreting melatonin, start secreting cortisol, ramp up metabolism, increase alertness, right? Ready to start the day because here is this source of information that is saying sunrise. Same thing happens at the end of the day, right? When we get that kind of like contrast of light as the sun is setting, it's information for my brain to say the day is over. Stop the cortisol, start the melatonin, slow down the metabolism, decrease arousal, prepare for recovery, restoration, sleep. But we have disrupted that relationship. Most people don't wake up in the morning and go out and be like, can I get sunlight in my eyes, right? They stay in the house, they're on the computer, they put their sunglasses on, they're in their, UV protected car with windows, right? So immediately we've lost this connection to a huge source of our energy. And we've furthered that disruption with artificial light, with use of our phones late at night, early in the morning, right? We've disrupted this capacity. Now, coming back to the idea of sunscreen, all these receptors for sunlight on my skin that are then being blocked, right? And the addition of chemicals to the largest organ in my body, right? We absorb through our skin. We start to kind of see this picture of, are we right in blaming the sun for all these forms of cancer? Or is it this disrupted relationship with the sun, right? I'm from the tropics, right? If I spent 3-4 hours in the sun, I would be fried. This is not what I'm saying. But smart dosage right? Intentional dosage of the sun, right? Going out early in the morning and getting a lot of sunlight in my eyes and on my skin, minimizing my time in the middle of the day, right? This high solar angle, this high UV radiation. So maybe limiting that to 20 minutes. And then guess what? Using this pretty advanced technological thing called shade, right? Wear long sleeves, put on a hat, sit under a tree, right? We don't have to use this chemical-based toxic ingredient to try and protect us from this dangerous thing in the sky. We need to redevelop our relationship with the source of energy that keeps life actually living on Earth. Right? So let's continue moving around. Let's come back to ground. Okay. We invent a lot of shit that messes with our system, right? The introduction of plastic and rubber are great examples, right? Plastic, we're seeing microplastics accumulating in the human body, right? Found in breast milk, found in brain tissue, right? We're measuring the impact of plastic, right, through all these different ecosystems in the world. Rubber is also an interesting one, right? Rubber prevents that conduction of energy. Right? So rubber shoes, rubber tires in our car, right? Insulated housing. We've gone from constant contact and relationship with the earth to almost none. Many people wake up in their house, right, insulated, and they put on their shoes and they walk to their car and they get out and they hop in their office and they spend all day in this insulated, protected, air-conditioned, stale environment, back in the car, back home. Didn't touch the ground once today. This is incredibly confusing for the body, right? Our biology has evolved in contact with the earth. Right? And it is required to create stability within our electrical system. But because of shoes, cars, housing, many people have lost this connection. I ask people all the time, like how much time would you spend barefoot in a week? And they're like, huh? It's really interesting. If we just again consider that this is a necessary component for my body to establish balance, and we've disrupted that through the introduction of certain materials and certain behaviors as humans in the 21st century, perhaps this is also a culprit when it comes to this depletion of my energy, right? Next thing is breath. I want to keep moving so this doesn't turn into a too long a video, and I hope you're still with me, right? Breath, dysfunctional breathing is so prevalent. All right, we're starting to see that and we're starting to focus on it and highlight that. But if we understand again, right, cellular energy, it's very much dependent on my relationship with oxygen, carbon dioxide, right? My mitochondria require that oxygen coming in so they can produce the ATP that we spoke about earlier, right? The source of energy that my cell use. If I've got a disrupted relationship with carbon dioxide in particular, I might not be able to deliver the oxygen to the cells. Right now, my cell's moving into this kind of backup process of anaerobic metabolism. Anaerobic being no oxygen, right? Oxygen not getting delivered. What's controlling that oxygen, carbon dioxide? The way that I breathe. What's influencing the way that I breathe? Again, the environment that we've created. We're sitting 8 hours a day. You're on your phone 4 hours a day, right? You are chronically overstimulated and stressed. Right? Life trauma, back injuries, all these things that may show up as a disruption of my breathing. And so not one of these things is like this catastrophe, right? But if we go through each of them, it's like the degradation of soil and food, right? And the change of our food system, addition of certain ingredients, right? We can argue pretty confidently that there's been a disruption in our assimilation of energy as it comes in the form of food, right? Most people have developed a adverse relationship, a fear of the sun, and they protect themselves for it and they don't expose themselves to it in correct ways. We require early morning sunlight in our eyes to set our body clock. We require sunlight in our skin to help us convert vitamin D, right? To run all of these different processes in the body. Sunlight in the evening to prepare my body for recovery, sleep, restoration. Right? But if I'm avoiding those things and I've developed this fearful relationship, and then I'm going to go and throw on sunscreen, right? We disrupt that source of energy. Most people aren't spending any time with their feet in the dirt, right? They're not taking their shoes off and walking in the grass, right? They have rubber-soled shoes, rubber-soled cars, and they work in in an insulated building. And so minimizing that contact with the earth can create a disruption of my energy system. And then finally, we see there's a huge prevalence of dysfunctional breathing, right? So let me just take this one step further, right? So if all of this, right, is how much energy I have available, right? And we've seen a huge decrease in that through the reasons that I just explained. Now let's talk about the demand, right? So not only have we seen a massive reduction in the amount of energy that's available, we've seen a huge increase in the amount of demand on our energy system. Right? Think about it. You don't have to go back too far, right? Let's go back 50 years before the internet, right? We really only had access to what was around us, right? Even, there was the news and we had stories, but go back a little bit further before that, and it really was this close sphere. And go back for 99% of evolution, right, is we were a small, close-knit community. We didn't really know what was happening out there. Right? I can pick up my phone and be connected to 6 billion people that are on the internet, right? I can have access to stories about what is happening in every part of the world. And guess what? The news isn't positive, right? Like, I'm not flipping on my phone and what's being crammed down my face is positive, optimistic joy. It's war and famine and crisis and politics and all this bullshit that drains my energy, right? Think of when your computer's got too many tabs open and it starts to glitch and slow down, right? Like, how many tabs are open in our brains today? Right? Our minds are trying to solve all these problems, the hustle culture, the expectations. Am I good enough? What should I be doing? I should be working harder, right? Like the unmade decisions, the untaken actions. This builds up and it is a drain on my energy, right? Cognition, right? Me thinking the thoughts and remembering the things and predicting the future, it costs energy. There's no free lunches in the body. And so we think more thoughts than we used to. We're exposed to more information than we once were. So we're seeing a huge increase in the demand on my resources. So if we take this final step, right, we've seen a reduction in the energy that's available and an increase in the demand. If this results in someone being in a deficit, it almost doesn't matter what they do. No amount of supplementation is going to take someone out of that deficit. Healing happens when there is a surplus of resources, right? So if we come back to this idea, what we mentioned a little bit earlier in terms of the basal metabolic rate, and just to kind of expand upon this, it's estimated that 60 to 70% of the energy that's coming in is going to basal metabolic rate, right? Just keeping the lights on. Just keeping my body functioning, right? Powering my body throughout the day. So that only leaves 30 to 40% left over, right? But if we've seen a massive reduction in the energy coming in, right, I may not have any surplus. Most of my energy might be just going to keep the lights on. There's nothing left over for optimism, joy, motivation, right? Manifestation, visualization, all these things that people are told to do are contingent on the fact that they have enough resources to do it. Healing, right? This deep restoration at a cellular level through to a nervous system kind of reorganization requires energy. Many people are approaching health from deficit because the food they're eating is bullshit, right? They're not in relationship with the sun or nature. They are not in relationship with the earth, right? They breathe poorly, and that results in a massive reduction in the energy that is coming into the body. And then the lifestyle that we're all living in the 21st century in terms of the demands on that energy is creating more of a deficit. And so what people need to be doing to start, right, building this foundation that allows for health to occur is reestablishing an energy surplus. And so how do we do that? Right? What we have to do is kind of understand, right, where is my energy leaking, right? And what are the things that give me more energy, right? Where is my energy leaking? This might be reducing my commitments, not hanging out with people that don't make me feel good, right? Setting a consistent bedtime, not spending an hour and a half on social media before I fall asleep, right? Just identifying these things that drain my energy resources and doing something about it, right? And then thinking about how do I increase my energy? Well, we come back to what's the food that I'm eating, right? Can I move away from processed food, added sugars, added ingredients, and eat more of a whole food diet, right? Yeah, bonus if it's organic, bonus if it's regenerative, right? But work with what you've got. Shop around the outside of the shopping center, of the supermarket, right? And actually buy food, not food products, right? Can I take my shoes off every day for 10 minutes and just feel my feet in the grass? And don't be checking your email. Don't be planning your day. Just connect. Just be present and feel yourself connection with the earth. Perhaps at the same time, I'm not wearing my sunglasses. I'm outside and I'm letting that early morning sunlight hit my eyeballs, right? I'm spending a little bit of intentional time outside and feeling the sunlight hit my skin throughout the day, right? And I'm working on restoring my breathing and pushing back these environmental influences like sedentary lifestyle, sitting too much time on their phone, right? postural influences, and I'm helping restore and recalibrate my breathing so my energy has, right, the machinery required to my body has the machinery required to produce the necessary energy, right? This is the primary equation when it comes to health, is do I have enough resources to heal? And if the answer is no, then healing is just another threat to a body stuck in survival, right? It is in a state of conservation, right? A state of retraction. It is trying to conserve its resources to stay alive. It just doesn't have enough for you to feel good and motivated and positive and want to exercise. And right, these things require a surplus. So reestablishing this healthy relationship with the sources of energy in my life, right? Plugging some of the drains is going to result in moving from a deficit to a surplus. And when we do that, guess what? We got a little bit of energy left over to play with. And that energy can be allocated by the body to reorganize the nervous system, to repair cells, to reduce inflammation, to manage disease, right? A different approach. Focus first on energy, plug the drains, enhance our sources of energy, and you might be surprised at how quickly things can change because you actually have the capacity to change. I hope this is helpful. Please let me know in the comments below.